Hello and welcome back to The Spotter, the podcast for those who never ask for help but need it. I hope everyone is doing very well. I hope you're all enjoying the nice weather. It has been surprisingly hot in the UK. I don't think I've got many abroad listeners, international listeners at the minute. There's a little bit of a breakdown, which was quite cool. Seeing some people I think I had a couple of people in Oz, but there was, I can't remember where else, but yeah, it was pretty cool seeing the breakdown. But anyway, I hope everyone's doing well and enjoying this rare bit of sustained sun in this country. But next week it's going to get a little bit worse, so enjoy it while you can. Again, just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone that is reaching out, listening, and giving their thoughts on the podcast. You know, when I started this, which was literally a month ago, I'd be lying if I said I was expecting. I wasn't expecting basically just the amount of people that have come up to me so far, and have opened up to me. And you might have been thinking like, well, why wouldn't you? Because what you're doing is, but it's not that. It's more the case of I'm doing this with the intention of down the line, there may be people reaching out to them, maybe people asking me questions, giving me topics, blah, blah, blah. But it's really quite emotional when you get people coming up to you saying, love what you're doing, keep it up. You're onto something special here. Here's my experience with X, Y, and Z. What you've done has led me to do this. And it really does hit you. It's like one of those things where you just say to yourself, right, that's exactly that's why I've set out to do what I'm doing, really. Giving myself a bit of purpose. I feel like this is something I was meant to do, talk and help individuals. And I do really hope that I can, continue. And obviously, as we go on this journey, I want to make sure that I open up the space for topics from individuals as well. It's not just going to be about my experiences in life, but these, I've got plenty to talk about. And they're topics that I think resonate with people. Well, evidently, like having people come up to me and, talk to me about their own experiences. So, yeah, today's one, as you've probably seen by the title, is, again, another deep one, delving into my background, upbringing, but more on my, my mum's side now. So, yeah, growing up around depression, those themes and things like that, basically. So, as I think I touched upon it in the first two episodes, and, my mum's been through a lot. And I've seen a lot. My family's seen a lot, obviously, as I've been growing up, and we've all grown up with it as well. But the effects of things like depression on an individual, I think, especially the individual going through it, but I think the people outside looking, from afar, let's say, I think from a young age as well, that can have quite an effect on an individual. So my mum has what's called bipolar disorder. So if you look up the term on the NHS website, here is exactly what it says. It says bipolar disorder is a mental health condition where you have extreme mood changes. Medicines and taking therapy can help manage it. Well, yeah, mum's medicated for it, and she has been for as long as I can remember. But bipolar disorder is just, I feel like in today's day and age, depression is one of those topics where there's so many different, I'd say so many different, I was going to say themes of depression, but yeah, different types of depression. But bipolar is, very much you have your highs and your lows, but it's not as simple as, just a bit up and down. Some people being like, just a little bit up and down all over the place. It's not that. Like trying to, and seeing like this trying to be controlled and managed over the years, as my mum's son, has been difficult because there's been so many different stages in her life where things have been so testing. She's been through, and this will be, again, another episode probably down the line talking about things like cancer. She's been through cancer treatment. She's been through, sadly, she's had brain damage as well. There's been events in her life where you almost like expect that there's going to be knock-on effects to things like the already existing disorder that's bipolar. And yeah, perks to her for still pushing on in life and, showing up because she's had it rough. I think as for anyone out there that is growing up currently or is going through, depression, a form of depression, I really do, send my love and thoughts to you. I know it's not an easy thing to go through. I've even struggled myself, I think, with, and I say I think because, again, as you get older, you start to realise things. But I've started looking back on certain parts of my life and being like, okay, I acknowledge that now. I acknowledge that that's where that's stemmed from. I realised that actually, maybe I had bouts of depression when I was, seeing my mum go through things like her cancer treatment and feeling like I didn't have anyone to talk to and really, let things out. I closed up. I closed myself up, and it wasn't until I really, joined my current gym and got my head stuck down into, bodybuilding training that I actually started to feel like I could just breathe. So obviously I'm not a medical professional. I can't, talk in depth about like really what bipolar is. I can talk about what my experience is, seeing it for, in an individual that's close to me. But please do let me know in the comments on the podcast episode, or if you know me, come up to me and have a chat with me, send me an Instagram, whatever. I'd love to hear your experiences, stories, loved ones, yourselves, if this topic hits home as well. But growing up watching bipolar, well, let's strip it right back. From what I know, it was after so I've got siblings, and it was after my sister's birth, I think, that my mum ended up developing bipolar I think it was after, a lot of people go through postnatal depression and things like that. But what actually I don't know what spurred it on, but I think it progressed from that point. Obviously I wasn't alive at that point, but I think it's been with her ever since. And it's one of those things that medically you manage. Typically you're not allowed, you have constant reviews, medical reviews and things like that, but you don't typically come off your medication unless you're weaned off, or you can make changes. Like she's had many changes throughout her life, but you don't typically just come off of it. So it's one of those gradual things in life. So it's just one of those things that's managed. Don't think it ever really goes. But what you sort of tend to see is that, especially with like bipolar, you have what's called like the mania side, which is your highs, feeling really confident, maybe wanting to go to places, feeling like you can do things that you normally wouldn't in your normal life. Like it doesn't sound bad on the surface, but it can have a very bad knock-on detrimental effect to the people around you when they're seeing like, right, actually, no, you rein in a bit. Like just it's hard. And then you have your lows, which are the, if you're hitting your lowest points, you're actually quite concerned about, things like taking your own life, not wanting to be here, not feeling like you can cope. There isn't, the in-between is just, quote unquote, normal life. But being there and staying there is very much dependent on, external factors, how your life's going, people around you, your perception of life in itself, I imagine, from what I've seen anyway. And, my mum hasn't had it, like, from what I understand, she hasn't had it easy. She's, with something like this, she's managed to try and keep herself in work throughout life, but she struggled. She's always showed up as a mother. She's been a great mum to me. But she struggled with it for, throughout my childhood. And I've seen that as well. And it's been quite hard to, grow up knowing that it's something that would never leave her, and there was nothing I could do as a kid about it as well. So, if I take it back, like my earliest, I'd say, memories of, I think, seeing, mum go through it would be, just day to day. Like there would be instances where music, I think, was used, one of those things where music was used as almost like a coping mechanism, keeping her calm, depending on her mood as well. Certain types of music would be playing in the house. And I would end up knowing, like, I could actually predict, throughout my years of, being around it, experiencing it, I could predict how she was feeling based on her actions, what she was doing day to day. And I would then almost change my behaviour to ensure that I wanted to make sure that she was okay. So therefore, if I knew she wasn't that great, I would be asking, even as a young kid, I'd be asking, could I do anything to help? Could I help clean up? Could I do... is there anything you need me to do around the house? I would take myself upstairs. I'd keep myself away, make sure that she had peace. And I knew, like, even at the time, obviously, I know more so now, but even at the time, I knew that this was quite probably not like a normal thing to go through, but it was, that's our life, and it was my normal, it was her normal, and I'm sure she wouldn't have at the time thought that was what I was doing, but I was conscious of it. And equally on the flip side, I knew that, if she was in a good mood, just to almost take that with a pinch of salt, because you wouldn't necessarily know if she'd woken up and she was in, a mania stage. It was very difficult to understand, really, as a young child, where on that, I suppose, spectrum she was. So, and yeah, I've just, looking back and sort of reminiscing, I can see now that my behaviours massively changed, depending on how she was day to day, to try and either keep her in a happy, state of mind, or to bring her up. There'll be days where she wouldn't. This is typically themes with people that are depressed and are struggling with life in its, in its current form and its form back then. How whatever whatever stage of life you're struggling at. It's quite common that some days you wake up and you're like, I don't want to get out of bed. So there would be days where I'd be almost like, wanting to. I'd be saying like, right, here's a cup of tea. Do you want me to do anything for you? Should we go for a walk? And this was sort of later on in life, maybe when I was 14, 15. So, it was, when I was in secondary school. But if she had, set in her head that she was not feeling good and it wasn't her day, that would be it. And there wouldn't be anything you could do about that. So, yeah, it sort of, what formed in me was this like day-to-day behavior spectrum. How would I change depending on how she was? And I imagined that, that would probably be something that kids, of that age would do. You're with your mum all the time, because dad wasn't really around consistently. I didn't have, and obviously he was battling, as we know in the previous episode, he was battling his own addiction issues. So it wasn't a very consistent, reliability, if that makes sense. So I was here on my own. Obviously I had family in that, there was family I could go to. I'd always go to my nan's, like on the weekends. I'd have time away from my mum. I was supposed to give her a bit of time as well. But, it was just me and my mum, and you grow up around that, and you learn actually what's normal, what to expect, how to act. And yeah, that was my life. So sort of like behavior changes. I wonder if that sort of resonates with anyone listening. If it does, please let me know. Again, would love to hear any personal experiences if you're able to tell me, or, get really deep in these topics. I know these are quite, in depth and quite, it's almost like ripping the Band-Aid off of some of these, but that's kind of what I wanted to do with the podcast, is like talk about themes and things that, everyone struggles with, but we don't do enough with, in terms of talking about them and bringing them to the surface. These are hard conversations, hard topics, but, hopefully it does help people. So anyway, as, to talk about their behaviour changes, how I sort of changed the way I lived as a child, all alongside this, it was very much a case of not knowing very much, like whether or not my mum at some point might be, sadly committed to omitted to, mental health institute. There were at the times, various hospitals that they might have to go to for periods of time when you're struggling with depression to recover. Similar to, I suppose, when you are struggling as an alcoholic, you go into, rehab therapy, and go off and do almost courses and things like that to get yourself off of that addiction, in the hope that that's permanent. But yeah, she was, bless her, she was multiple times in her life, she's been admitted to wards, come out, much better state of mind. And then that's where you sort of hope to yourself, right, let's pray that doesn't happen again, and she can just, string together normal days, normal weeks, normal months, and have a really good year, and then it goes on like that. And touch wood, the last time I think was in 2015, so we are well and truly 10 years, near enough, into a very good stint, and that's the longest. So I really do pray and hope that she stays well and healthy, continuously forever. So that's the goal, isn't it? So, but it's not, I can imagine it's not that simple for, I say simple, 10 years is a long time, but there were multiple trips in hospital. I can imagine that a lot of people, maybe not listening, but hopefully as the, the audience expands and listens to these episodes, maybe, you all have your own journeys with depression. It's maybe not as, something like bipolar disorder. Maybe it's something different. Maybe it's just you constantly feel like you don't want to deal with life. So, yeah, I think that my early stages, witnessing how she went through that, constant trips into hospital, I think it created a bit of a, almost like an anxiety with me. I didn't know whether or not, again, similar to what we explored in episode 2, I didn't really know if mum was coming or going. I as much as she was here and it was just me and her, I felt like I had to grow up quite quickly to realise that, my life, it would be, there would always be some sense of doubt. Was I going to be, on my own at periods of my life? Was I going to have to look after myself? Was I going to have to move away? Was mum going to be safe? And yeah, it was a big whirlwind of emotions all the time. And I think, thankfully at the time I had and I have had, great friends and people to rely on, talk to, but it wasn't until I really got older and realised some of the stuff that had happened in childhood that I'd seen, witnessed and been through. And then when mum went through her cancer therapy treatment for AML in 2016-17, then I started to realise, I'm not that okay. Like, I'm not this stable guy that everyone sees all the time. I am someone that's struggling. I need to do something for myself. And that's when I really poured myself into the gym. 2018, joined my current gym and really, got my head down, got my first coach and decided that, bodybuilding was my thing and I was going to really connect with that. And the gym became my safe space. That's where I'd go to, and, it'd be, at the time, I'd be going late at night. I feel like that was my space where I could really, let go of a lot that was going on in life. And I'd actually say that looking back now that I probably struggled at points with depression myself. I think I just didn't recognise it at the time. There were days where I would just want to be silent. I didn't really want to get up out of bed. I didn't want to go to work. I didn't want to go to the gym. I'd force myself. And obviously that's a theme that a lot of people see anyway, talking about motivation. That's completely different. I started to build up a bit of a discipline and, it has helped me. I've, gained a passion out of it. I know that I want to continue bodybuilding for, as long as I can. But that all stemmed from me, needing a form of therapy. So I'm grateful for it in that sense, but obviously I wish I had probably sought out help earlier. Maybe, had someone to talk to and maybe looked at therapy, looked at counselling a little bit earlier for these themes, but I just didn't. It was just what I was used to as a kid. And you grow up and then you realise, actually, I need help too. I need someone to speak to. I need something, I need a place to go. But yeah, bipolar in itself then. So growing up around that, again, behaviour changes, form of anxiety, realising that maybe I was almost worried that would I follow suit eventually? Like, would this be something that I would end up developing? And, I don't think that's the case. Like, I think I can confidently say I haven't got bipolar. Like, so, it's not, I don't think it's something that's passed down, genetically. I don't think, again, I'm not a medical professional, but that would be something to look into. But yeah, I definitely had a lot of anxiety and I do still today. And I think this, again, leads on to that whole people-pleasing theme that I maybe spoke about in episode 1, that I feel like I've become this individual now that I seek to help others. I seek to please others. I want to make sure I don't piss people off. I don't like the idea of upsetting people. And I think it probably stems back to then, thinking that, would mum wake up one day and be pissed off so much that it might end up, coming back onto me? What could I do to please her? What could I do to make her happy? And I was constantly balancing that day to day. So, growing up around someone with depression, you think to yourself, right, what's today going to bring? Like, what conversations are we going to have today? How am I going to have to act? Do I need to get out of the house? Do I need to go and play with my friends? Do I need to just sit on my game? It's very much a balancing act. And I think that it's probably led a little bit to how I am today. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think at its core, someone that wants to be a people pleaser isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think it's about reining in and realising when it becomes an issue. So, for example, there's been times in my life where I've poured so much into other people's cups, I realise that I'm empty. And I think that's something that, you can probably take away from this, is making sure that you look at your own cup first and realise, have you got enough to actually give to other people before you become empty yourself? And, it's all good and well being like, I want to please people, I want to help people, that's why I'm doing the podcast. But, you have to do it in a way that is sustainable and also where you're putting yourself first. And, first and foremost with this podcast, I'm putting myself first because I am being vulnerable. I'm talking about my experiences. I'm talking about my life, my upbringing, and in the hope of actually opening up to everyone else, and allowing you in to my life, and, keeping it raw, and then allowing for themes and topics to get out there and hopefully get guests on so that we can, really delve into topics that are going to help other people. So I think that is if we put that in a bracket of people pleasing, I think I'm doing that, with a motive that it's good, it's sustainable. It's not something that's going to drain me because this is something I want to do and I'm passionate about. In the past, I think that I didn't know when to really rein it in because I probably didn't know when to do that as a kid. I didn't know when I could switch off. I always thought that I had to be on edge to make sure that she was happy. I wanted to make sure that my mum wasn't suffering. I wanted to make sure that everything was fine in my life because realistically it wasn't. As a child, I didn't have that necessarily stable parentage. I didn't have that. So I kind of was like, right, what can I control? I can control how I am to this person. I can control the emotions I give off. I can control what I'm offering. And in return, maybe I get some control in my life and what's returned. It wasn't necessarily always the case. And I think that emotional confusion that it created as a kid, not knowing, why or how I could help in other ways. I think that was, it kind of, you try and, find this ability to control things in life and realize it's not as simple as that. And as a kid, you're balancing things. And at such a young age, you're trying to, I suppose, be a child as well. But yeah, I definitely think I had to grow up quite quickly, even when I was a youth. So basically it was like reading emotional cues. And obviously that probably has helped me later in life. I think I'm a pretty good people reader. FYI, if we meet, I'm not going to just read you and be like, right, I'm going to make my decision on this person, that first interaction. It's not that, but it does almost, I think, change the way in which you see the world a little bit. But yeah, I guess there's themes there of maybe always walking on eggshells, wanting to fix someone that I loved, but kind of being powerless because, as we know, depression, things like bipolar, that's a day-to-day thing. You can't one day say, right, tomorrow I'm going to be absolutely fine. I'm going to crack on and have a great day. It sounds good. You can affirm to yourself, reaffirm. I think it is. There we go. Reinform. I'll just inform myself that I'm going to be good. You can affirm with yourself that, yeah, I'm going to be fine. And it might be a good mental cue, but realistically, if you've got something like bipolar or depression, you've been, diagnosed with it as well, then how the hell can you wake up and be like, I'm going to be fine today? Like, you just don't know because it's just a balancing act. And I think, some of these themes have probably followed me later on in life. And here I am today, trying to please people on a larger scale. And in the hope that I can sort of almost control what I am outputting onto the podcast, and then getting back from you guys. But yeah, I think that if I know that I'm probably not, my outreach isn't necessarily children or people that are younger than, say, 18. But if there are individuals out there that are struggling with this, managing things in their family, going through it themselves, like, trust me, I know, well, I think I do. I know what you're going through. I can resonate with it. And, I'm here as well. Hopefully I'm quite a calming, soothing voice for you. You can hear that I've been through it as well. I've seen it. It's not been an easy journey. But I've got the utmost respect for my mum. She's been on such, and you'll hear about this as we talk about things in the podcast in coming episodes. She's been on such an up and down journey in life, and it's really, it's changed my perception on how much people can go through as individuals. You think as a bodybuilder, when you're putting yourself through these failure sets and really like striving to build muscle, you're like, yeah, I can do more, can constantly do more. It's like when you see individuals that are, battling medical issues, trips in and out of hospital, depression disorder, medication all the time. Like she has chemotherapy, leukemia, and brain damage. Like you think to yourself, okay, yeah, people can and sadly have to go through a lot in life, and it does. She's the strongest person I know for sure, and I've got a lot of respect for her. She's pretty much brought me up on her own. I've had help around. There's people in the family like my nan, my sisters, and my dad, obviously in his own ways, bless him. But Mum has been there through thick and thin when she has probably needed someone else in her life to support and help her, and she has managed to bring me up into a semi-respectable, I can't even get my words out to say, semi-respectable individual. I hope so anyway. So yeah, really this episode is almost in dedication to her, I think. And I know I'll explore things, the further on as we go in the podcast journey, and maybe talk about things with individuals as well. Things will come up, but I almost wanted to do this I don't want to go too in depth because I can't really talk about bipolar and go medically, into it. I can give you a little bit at the end, maybe just as almost like a bit of insight into symptoms and things like that to look out for if people are listening to this and almost intrigued. But yeah, it was definitely a real shaping part of my childhood, as you can expect. And yeah, it's just shaped my mental health now, I think. I think it almost, I was exposed to mental illness very early as a kid. My understanding then was very much, it's a day-to-day balancing act. And now I'm like, right, I've just got the utmost respect for anyone else that's going through it and is struggling because it is difficult. So yeah, I think that it got to a point in my probably early adult life where I knew that, this is just something that has to be managed, and it's very much I'm powerless. It's as long as the individual, being my mum, has people around her that love her and can reassure her that she's safe, she's got good people around her, life is worth living, then that's all you can do, and hope that they see that day to day, and see that week to week, month to month, year to year, and can hopefully string together these consistent, good, well and healthy and happy years, where they're not going through as much. But it's not as simple as that sometimes. It's really not. So yeah, hopefully this is just almost like scrape the surface a little bit of mental health, bipolar, depression, growing up with it. I wonder if anyone else out there has grown up with depression or a family member. As I said at the start, I want to hear these things. And I want to hear, similar to me, I found, that the gym was my therapy. What was your therapy? Have you found something else, a coping mechanism in life? Have you found that actually, you're into art, you're into talking, you're into reading, you're into, walking, running, keeping active? What was yours if you've been through something similar? I will talk about this idea of the gym, passions turning into, or things that we seek out as therapy and coping mechanisms that turn into passions, because I think there's a deeper meaning to all of that, and almost like the meaning to life as well. So I will go into that in a future episode. But yeah, this one has been very much a little bit of a quicker deep dive into depression in my life from an early stage and how it shaped me now. As I said, just to recap, I think that those early stages have shaped me now in the sense that I do struggle with anxiety still day to day. I am a people pleaser at heart. I don't like the idea of upsetting people, and I feel like I always want to be in control, even when I know I can't. I think that, they are things that I need to try and understand a bit more about myself, and, realise that sometimes I can let go, and I can't control everything in life, and I don't have to please everyone, and I probably won't please everyone. But, that is just life. So, I hope everyone has enjoyed this. I hope it's not been too much of a... I don't want these to be like downer episodes. I want them to be insightful. I want them to be like, oh my God, yeah, that's cool to understand. That's cool to hear, cool to listen to. I know they're deep, they're meaningful, they're raw, they're gritty, but that's the whole point of these. So as I said, I was going to go through just quickly before we finished some symptoms of bipolar. As I said, because obviously with bi meaning two, yeah, there you go. Take away that little nugget if you didn't know that already. So you've got the mania or hypermania side, which is basically high moods. So very happy, excited, overly energetic, confidence boosts that aren't maybe, consistent or normal or what you see day to day. And then there's actually the low side, which is the typical depression side, where, completely sad, you don't feel like you're hopeless, you've lost the will to live sometimes, overly tired, fatigued, you feel like you're giving up. So they're the two sides to bipolar. Obviously, if people are listening to this thinking that they need to go and seek medical professional to talk about these things, definitely do that. Go and speak about things, please. If there's one thing you can take away from this is talking does help. It's helped me with many things in life. Please don't suffer in silence. I'm here and I'm 100%, saying that if you need someone to talk to that is, that you don't know, maybe you're listening that we don't know each other, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to be an ear or be a shoulder, please. I would hate for people to be suffering in silence. I've suffered, not as extreme as my mum has, sadly, in that sense, bless her. But, I've realised that I wish I'd had people to really, open up to when I needed it. Or, I wish I felt like I could, I've had plenty of good people around me, but I didn't take action. So please make sure that you do. So please, if there are takeaways to this, let me know. I think that I've got quite a lot of pipeline for these episodes, so now it's about getting some good guests to come on, reach out to some good individuals and get people with raw, true stories to get on the podcast, and hopefully it helps people. But there's been a little bit of an insight into depression in my life, growing up with it and around it as a kid. I hope it's resonated with you, and I will speak to you in the next one. Take care.